Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are starting a new week. That means we're starting a new theme, and this is Women of Music, coinciding with International Women's Day at the beginning of this month and just general Women's History Month that we're in right now. We're going to be looking at music that features women musicians, vocalists, songwriters, etc., and celebrate their contributions to the arts. So, to start that off, we're checking out a band called Braids. The track we're looking at is In Kind from a few albums ago. And let's see what they're bringing to the table. Just warmth. Interesting. Foreshadowing, which would indicate a smooth transition, but also that really harsh removal of the choir. Kind of like getting slapped in the face with reality while daydreaming. Yeah. These crescendos and decrescendos creating these volume swells. Beautiful. The drummer is really interesting. The drumming is a bit muted, but still technical. Well, not muted, restrained. Yeah, tasteful complexity, I think, is the phrase I want to use for the drums. That whistle tone. everything is very calm, soothing. Yeah, see what I'm talking about? Yeah, the bass has this ebb and flow idea, kind of like half of a walking bass line. Really interesting production on this line. It's really interesting to have a song that's been so consonant for so long. Even up until what I think is that last vocal note. Introduce heavy dissonance there at the end. Huh. So, a lot of this track is predicated on a single idea that's explored in a couple of different ways, but at least to my ear, we had this linear repetition, if that makes sense. Every section feels slightly different than the one previous to it, and slightly different than the one that comes after it, but also very similar to all of them. And a lot of that's because each of these sections are crafted in a very similar manner, meant to achieve a specific sound throughout the entire track. One of the core aspects here is the ebb and flow of volume and width. I was mentioning it volume wise at one point, where we would kind of start out small and then crescendo into a louder section, sit in there for a couple of beats, and decrescendo back down to the quieter level. And we stay in the quieter level about 60-70% of the time. It's a majority of the phrase, and then we have this peak at the end of it, and we come back down. It's always this this rising and falling action. This is present everywhere in a multitude of ways. In fact, there at the end, when I pointed out the bass was doing that half walking bass line idea, for the 60 to 70% of the quieter element of this ebb and flow, I should say smaller, because this one's not dealing with volume, it's dealing with note concentration. But we have these odd accented hits. It's just like silence and then boom, boom, boom. We get a couple of these notes. And then, though, when the vocalist has risen their volume, the bass comes in with a bit more notes. Boom, 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 boom. And again, we have this rising and falling of pitch. Boom, 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 boom. However, we also have more notes. It is more energetic. It has more direction to it than the odd accented hits that we had in the previous uh, bit of this phrase. And so everybody contributes to this ebb and flow in a variety of different ways across the entire track. The drums do it with the rhythmic syncopation, they do it with how many notes they're utilizing, they do it with volume as well. The guitars shift between two styles of playing where we have a chordal based idea where they sort of strum out a note and allow it to resonate, and that's sort of their smaller section. And in a larger section, they have melodies. They also have that repeating line that we had at the end and the beginning, the dun 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 dun. I thought it was a keyboard at first, but every time it came up, the guitarist was missing. So it could be a keyboard. The guitarist walks over to one and plays it instead of the guitar, but it could also just be the guitar with some effects on it. Regardless, I'm attributing it to the guitarist, regardless what instrument they're playing. And then the vocals, of course, they are the spotlight of the song. It's really difficult to miss the ways that they use dynamic elements to create larger and smaller sections and to create the flow of the track. And so, through a lot of this song, we are on a gently moving ocean. The waves come up and the waves come down. Waves come up, the waves come down. You're floating in this song alongside these musicians. And none of it ever feels, at least to me, it never gets to a point of hyper repetition despite all these sections utilizing the same bass. And there even is some repetition in the larger ideas. I think there is a type of chorus in here. I don't know if it's particularly reflected in the lyrics or the music itself, but the vocals do move between a lighter, airier, poppy style and that higher range falsetto plus um, whistle tone. And I do feel this ebb and flow there as well. It almost feels like a separation between verse and chorus, but I don't think the music around the vocals signifies this idea. Like I said, on the whole, I think this track is fairly linear. There are callbacks, there are variations on ideas, but I don't think we ever wholesale reuse a concept. However, that vocal line does get reused a couple of times, the whistle tone one. Um, and so, like, I want to read that as a chorus, but it's really difficult when the song doesn't support that. We just have one line that continues to, or one instrument that continues to return to this line. And yeah, I'm just not quite sure how to read it, but it ties into that idea I was talking about at the beginning of linear cycles or linear repetition, where the song simultaneously feels like there is no repeated element and also feels like every section is connected to something else that's come before it. That there's always this tie. Oh, that's familiar. I think it's almost that too. It's a vague familiarity. Like I think they've done this before. I don't know. It sounds very familiar, but I can't quite place it in another section. It's not like when you return to, a verse in a metal song and you return to an iconic riff and you're like, yep, that's the riff I love. I'm glad we got back to it. It's very definitive. We are reusing something we had heard before. Um, and that's just not the case here. And I don't know. I think this is just something I need a second listen on, particularly to focus in on loops and phrases and riffs and seeing how often things are reutilized in a one to one manner or even recontextualized or rearranged, uh, put a variation on an idea. It's just everything feels similar but new, and it's just a really interesting vibe that the entire track sits on. Now, I do want to talk about the vocals because they're front and center uh, in the mix. They're very present and center channel, but also because they are everywhere. We have very few moments without the vocals. They seem to be the spotlight, but this is kind of poppy as well. I'm not sure what subgenre of pop I would put this in, or maybe what subgenre of rock I would put this in. Maybe pop rock is a good place for this. So it makes sense that the vocals are the primary element here, but what I find most interesting about them is that, unlike with traditional pop, I don't know what was said here. When you turn on the radio and you listen to a top 40 track, the vocals are so clear and present, it is almost impossible not to catch them on a first time, especially the chorus, which I think is interesting because the chorus is usually where the most things are happening musically, and it's also where the vocals are the most clear and enunciated, primarily probably to make them catchy and get stuck in your mind, and you want to listen to more of the song, and you listen to more radio or Spotify or go get the album, whatever. It's all a marketing thing. Primarily a marketing thing. Let me walk back on that. Catchy hooks are not only a marketing thing, but it is a pretty big element of marketing a song. Here though, it's despite the fact that I think it is a rock band. I hear guitar, I hear bass, I hear drums, I hear vocals. It feels very similar, very close to more ambient electronic pop music. And I think a lot of that it deals with production and timbre choice and just disguising it to make it sound like something else. But the vocals just don't get that pop treatment. There's a lot of elements here that obscure the vocals, whether it's just not putting them as high above the band in the mix, kind of putting them down into where the band actually is and making them feel like a part of the band rather than an elevated element of it, or textures, loops, echoes, all sorts of things were going on with the vocal delivery on the production side that obscured the words themselves for me. At least I didn't pick up a single word. I have no idea what the song is about. But between like delays and echoes and all sorts of elements, at the end we had this really quick panning section, but it was actually the harmonized vocals that were being panned, and the original vocals were still center, which was this really strange illusion going on. I can't say I've ever heard anything like that. It's an interesting choice that, at least to me, is designed to create a fog around your vocals. It's difficult to focus in on either one of them, and it's definitely difficult to focus in on both vocals as a unified harmony. It was like having double vision. You can kind of make out what's going on, visually, but everything's blurry and there's more than one. And it's just really difficult to get a grasp on things, especially if you've just, hit your head or something, and you're getting some of that double vision from that. And it's difficult to concentrate on what's going on. You get elements, but not details, and that's sort of what was going on here. I knew they were vocals, I knew they were harmonizing, I knew they were singing in English, I think, but I couldn't I couldn't really focus on any of it. It was really difficult to pick anything out other than just these generic elements of it was singing. There were voices. Um, and so there's just a lot of elements here that kind of hide the vocals, to me at least, until we get to that chorus and we get the whistle tone line. And I found that to be it was a lot clearer in the production and pretty much every facet of the production. But the whistle tone is just really hard for me to hear enunciation through. So, I mean, once again, there is an element to the delivery that kind of goes against how I typically view vocals in popular tracks. Now, the last instrument I really want to touch on here is the drums because these elevate the song so much. We could have had some very simple drums in this track that would have leaned closer into that poppier rock vibe, and they would have been fine. You know, given the guitar was a lot of chords and the bass was isolated notes and rising and falling arpeggios, basically. And the vocals are just very bright and palatable. I was gonna say catchy, but I don't I don't know what the vocals were saying. But very palatable melodies, right? Up until the very end when we had those bits of dissonance in there, everything was just really consonant, beautiful, aiming for a general palatability that I think most people would find listenable. But the drums did not go for that simplicity at all. The drums right here could have been in a prog rock band. And it's primarily because of the melodic language that they utilize in their drumming. When you listen to the drums, it isn't about being a metronome. In fact, there are very few sections in here that are. Pushed the wrong button there. There are very. Go away. There are very few sections in here that are about the drums just laying down like snare on the backbeat or something like that. Quarter notes on the hi hat. It just doesn't happen. A lot of elements in here are energetic. They have a ton of movement to them, a lot of notes combined in a series. We do get a pulse from accented hits, but that's not, the pulse isn't the drum beat. The pulse is an aspect of the drum beat. There's a lot of, once again, in ebb and flow, we have sort of the idea of ghost notes in a larger concept. And I think the only reason I think like this is because drums just don't typically have, at least in rock and metal, the stuff we typically listen to here, they don't have volume. When you hit the snare, you hit the snare. Same goes for the tom and the cymbals. Rock and metal just have an aggressive drumming style to them that's not real big on volume dynamics. So the closest analogy to this would be ghost notes on the snare because it's the only time that we have volume dynamics with lighter notes and accented notes. Usually when we talk about snare accents, it's because that's when the snare is being hit. The snare is hit on 2 and 4, so we have snare accents on 2 and 4. But honestly, we don't even need to call them accents. They're just snare hits. But when we come to this, we have accents. We have volume dynamics. We have a variety of volume levels for things being hit. In a sense, everything has ghost notes and accents in a variety of patterns throughout this track. And I just love that energy to it because while the song has this very laid back, relaxed ebb and flow, I had mentioned sort of, coasting on on the ocean. Just, laying on your back and letting the water sort of just rock you and lull you into a sleep. The drums are not that a majority of the time. They do have this ebb and flow, as I mentioned earlier, where they shift how many notes or how loud they're playing and move along with the rest of the band in this smaller to larger concept. But even in the smaller concepts, we have more movement, more energy, more notes than would typically be expected. They could have just did boom, ka, boom, ka, but they didn't. They went for all these funky accents and fun fun symbol ideas, bouncing between all parts of the kits, using the rims in a lot of places. I heard some metallic clacks in this track, and it is just this. I had called it what did I call it? Tasteful complexity, because it never overrode what the band was doing. It never really called too much attention to itself, but it never relied on simply laying down the heartbeat of the track. It always wanted to do something more rhythmically with it. And as the only component of the song that has a rhythmic element to it, or I should say a strong rhythmic element, because every melody is rhythm based, but none of them in this track were heavily rhythmic, or maybe I should say just percussive, other than that opening guitar line or possibly the keyboard, the bum 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 bum. That's a very percussive line coming from a melodic instrument, but we only had it to bookend the track at the beginning and at the end. Everything in the middle, most of the stuff was atmospheric or harmonic or melodic. And so the drums have free reign of the percussive elements of this track. And they said, well, if I'm the only instrument doing this, it's not going to be boring. I'm going to do the drum work of two or three drummers here, and really try to fill this part out, because the atmosphere in here is thick and palpable. The emotion is strong. The melodies are present in multiple instruments. I'm just one drummer doing percussion stuff. I've got to keep up with the rest of the band, and absolutely brings that energy out and elevates the track. There's so many components of the drum work that I think make each of these sections better. They didn't need to do that. They could have been simple, but because they exist the way they do, it elevates the track in ways that really puts this band in a different spotlight for me. This could have been a typical pop rock track, but there's so many little nuances in here that tell me that this is more than just a pop rock band. And the drumming is certainly one of those aspects. Now, lyrically, we got some interesting things going on here. The first two tracks almost seem, or tracks, the first two stanzas almost seem to talk about reflecting on one's past. It says, well, I must have saw a girl who looked like myself. Your freckles remind me that a God is kind, white-cheeked and bleak, knowing all the answers. So you look like me, but you had a negative outlook on life. You were bleak, and you thought you knew all the answers. It doesn't say thought, it says knowing all the answers, but I get the illusion that it's almost as if saying you thought you knew all the answers back then. And so I thought I knew where this was going. This is a bit of self reflection on where one came from and where one is now, and looking at the distance between those 2 points in one's life. But that's not necessarily where things go. Now, to lean into this, our next stanza even starts to solidify this. It says, and it's a problem when you see through everything, which is that bleak, I understand the world, everybody's transparent to me, kind of edgy teenage kind of stuff. It says, but candy spills upon it when the lip suggests the mourning, the sadness type of mourning. And isn't it the worst when you wake up in the morning? There's no cat upon your bed and no mom to pet your head. And so once again, we have an idea of you thought you understood everything when you were younger, but this is the way life is now, and the old mindset just doesn't work here. Life is realer. on this side of your age, and the pretensions you had in your youth, they're not as effective anymore. But we kind of backpedal on some of this, and I think this is interesting because it almost puts a spin on this idea of wanting to be young again and sort of accepting, there's some bad parts. I was not as smart as I thought I was, and I've matured a lot since then. But sometimes I think of how nice it'd be to pop out of the womb again. Sometimes I think of how nice it'd be to take a nap without feeling I wasted my day. And like, there's these elements of innocence here, um, that are on the other side of that wish of wanting to be youthful again. It wasn't the best time. There's no need to romanticize one's youth, but there were positives to it. There are negatives to it, just like being older. And so we had this little twist. I thought I knew where we were going with the lyrics, and then we went a different way. And I was like, oh, this is cool. We've seen the opposite side. And then we end with two more stanzas that leave me a little confused, and that's because the metaphors, I think, go a little over my head. Says, left my conscience suffocation, see the mad side in my bald eyes. Left my conscience in quotations, said just what they want me to, seething. I don't know what it is to see the mad side in my bald eyes. Bald eyes would be like old eyes, old age, seeing things with the wisdom of time, no? But what is the mad side? But I think it's interesting that both situations are about putting your conscience aside to do something that, at least it seems like, possibly engage in society. To see the craziness of society with weary eyes, and then to leave your conscience aside so that you can say what they want you to say, even if you don't believe in it, even if it makes you mad, it leaves you seething. You still have to say it because that's what society expects. Um, and there's another duality in there, but I don't know how it ties back to the idea of uh, the naive, innocent youthfulness versus the more mature wisdom of, your current age and wanting to be a kid again, having those desires to have the responsibilities lifted off of you. Ooh, responsibility. That's what the ending is about, right? You have to put your personal goals aside in order to go through with the responsibilities you have. And we don't always agree with the choices we make, but they're the ones we have to make to survive, even if they make us angry. And that's one of the responsibilities. That is the responsibility that our narrator is most angry about and wishes they can return to the naivety of a child, of just being able to sleep in all day without feeling like they wasted their day. Maybe they feel tired in a lot of different ways. Is that what this is about? Absolutely hating the concept of balancing one's needs with one's, what do you call it when it's like your character, your goals in life, your moral fiber, possibly? Having to balance that with the need to survive and to do things you don't agree with because that's how you survive in life. It's how you keep a roof over your head and food on the table. And wishing you could go back to the simpler days of youth, but also understanding that that decision in itself isn't even perfect because, well, you weren't that great of a kid either. It's not just all fun and games. You also have a wrong outlook on life. It was too bleak, and you thought you knew everything, and you weren't as open minded as you should have been. there are caveats to everything in life. Maybe. I don't know. What do you all think? Those are my thoughts on Braids in Kind. Oh, I forgot to touch on thematic cohesion there, but I don't know. The only thing I can really think is that a lot of this is sort of pensive. A lot of this is in her mind. In fact, we have the word think a lot in here. And a lot of this seems to be in the mind, which kind of goes along with this idea of etherealness, dreamlike. There's almost an absence of time in here, as everything feels simultaneously the same and different. And then there's also the ebb and flow of it all, which kind of shows the duality, the highs and the lows, no middle point. And that's reflected in the lyrics a bit, with the duality of both adulthood and childhood, innocence versus innocence and naivety versus wisdom and the need for responsibility and compromise. Yeah, there are parallels all throughout this if my read of the lyrics are accurate. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on Braids in Kind. What did you think? Was there anything in here that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or correct me on, or even just give your own perspective on? Let me know down in the comments. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, a link to my music, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, we have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll continue on with this week's theme of women in music and explore another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.